Hello world, this video is going to talk about folk psychology and the role it plays in different philosophical views of the mind. First things first, what is folk psychology, or FP for short? The simplest way to think about FP can best be explained by calling it by its other name, common sense psychology. FP refers to the way that we talk about different behaviors and relate them to mental states. More specifically, it refers to the way that we attribute mental states to behavior and talk about sentient beings as having intentions, beliefs, and desires, and attribute those states as the cause of their observable behavior. An everyday model of this would be smelling pizza, desiring pizza, and believing that there is pizza nearby, and walking towards the kitchen with the intent to get some pizza. In John Hyles' philosophy of the mind, Hyle refers to FP as the common sense theory of the mind encoded in our language, infesting the social and behavioral sciences. Hale goes on to point out that any succeeding theory would be stuck with one of two choices. It must either, 1, accept the old choice, or 2, completely replace the older theory. If the new theory takes option 1, it has to be able to explain how the older theory can be reduced to the newer theory. If the newer theory wants to replace the older theory, it has to be able to dispute and defeat the older theory's claim. Sometime in the beginning of the 20th century, presumably only the liveliest squad in the world, the Vienna Circle, took it upon themselves to clean up the mess they perceived previous philosophers had left behind, and set up some rules for what could qualify as a philosophic question. Namely, they wanted to better align the definition of a philosophical question to what they called logical positivism. Logical positivism is the idea that the only philosophical problems that are meaningful are the ones that can be reformulated into verifiable arguments, and everything else can be ignored because, it's meaningless. Essentially, the Vienna Circle argued that the meaning of anything and everything is established by its verification conditions. This is the idea known as radical empiricism. Following logical positivism and radical empiricism, philosophers and psychologists look to behaviorism. Behaviorism is the philosophical view and physicalist theory of the mind which holds that mental states are nothing more or above behavioral dispositions, which means that behaviorists would be denying the existence of FP altogether. Recall, when you take the second choice, your theory has to be able to dispute or disprove the older theory. So how can you disprove that mental states exist? Take Wittgenstein's beetle analogy, for example. It reads, suppose everyone had a box with something in it. We call it a beetle. No one can look into anyone else's box, and everyone says he knows what a beetle is by only looking at his beetle. Here it would be quite possible for everyone to have something different in his box. One might even imagine such a thing constantly changing. Just like Wittgenstein's beetle analogy, we are incapable into looking into each other's box when it comes to the mind, and we don't know whether or not our beetles, aka our mental states, are identical to somebody else's, or if it even exists. Because we can't speak objectively about our beetles, we can't be certain that we're even talking about the same thing, rendering our talk of them as meaningless. But that doesn't mean that non-behavioral conditions don't have to be explained. Even our language regarding the behavior can't be understood without understanding that there is something beyond the observable behavior. So why does it matter? This tells us a good theory about the mind should be able to answer how mental states operate to be able to account for something like FP, or suffer the consequences.